You're listening to Conversations with Chanda, a podcast that unpacks the community's grittiest, most vexing problems, hosted by Chanda Smith Baker.
This episode of Conversations with Chanda is sponsored by the Greater Twin Cities United Way. The Greater Twin Cities United Way unites community partners to meet urgent needs and make lasting change in the areas of housing, food, education, and economic opportunity. Together, they work with community to mobilize actions so that everyone can thrive.
I'm ready to start this next. I'm gonna hand the mic because my sister's reaching for it. But I hope you guys really appreciate and enjoy this next part, Conversations with Chanda.
Thanks, sister. It is an absolute delight to be in this conversation with you all today. Shannon is my sister, and I have other relationships with United Way besides my sister. I served on their board. I helped with one of their strategic plans. I led one of their largest funded organizations. And as Shannon mentioned earlier, I was part of the team that sort of came up with Justice for All as a way to look at how philanthropy can push the systems. And it is a topic that philanthropy doesn't always lean into. And I think there's so much opportunity for us to think about what investment, what proper investment, attention, and political power looks like in our state and in our communities. So I'm Chanda Smith Baker. I welcome you to Conversations with Chanda. This conversation series is really about lifting up leaders, having them tell our stories together so that we can humanize our experiences, so that we can put conditions and community into context. And so I am delighted to have you, Sheena Meade.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Excited to be here.
We had a good time at dinner last night, and I sent her some questions, and she said, "Are those the questions you're gonna be asking me?" And I heard, "Don't ask me them questions." And so I'm just gonna go. We're just gonna have a conversation. If you have a question, I'm really good at doing this. So just raise your hand and we'll see you and jump in. Do not worry about interrupting us. This conversation is for you to have an experience that you can take away with. And whatever you're thinking, whatever questions you have, somebody that will be listening on the radio or someone that might be listening to the podcast, wherever you can listen to your podcast is where you can find it. They might have that same question. And so I want to just jump in with you, okay?
Okay, I just want to just first say thank you to the United Way, Shannon, for bringing me out here to Minneapolis, and also for you lifting up this conversation. I'm really excited to just get in and have some fun here, y'all. So yeah, let's get into it.
Let's do it. And shout out to my church, Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church, Fellowship Minneapolis, for hosting this conversation. It feels good and aligned.
Yes.
Right? I feel like I'm in alignment right now. So because we are in the church,
keep it holy.
I'm gonna keep it holy and really start out with, normally I'll start out and say, what do you do and all that kind of stuff. But really I wanna know what your testimony is.
Oh, let me tell y'all, my testimony, it was a test a lot of times. And so I don't even know where to start really with my testimony. So I'll just give it to you the way I know how to tell my testimony. God has really showed up in my life in many ways and have shown me how to take my pain and turn it into purpose, and how to activate my purpose, create power by advocating for policies that I care about or that has impacted me. In that way, I say I was a teen mom at the age of 14, 16, 19. I was a young mother with 5 kids living on government assistance. Feeding my kids those WIC checks. I don't know if y'all know about them WIC checks, but my kids, they healthy, y'all. If y'all see any pictures of my kids, them WIC checks came through. They got that vitamin D, they got that juicy juice. And matter of fact, I used to be I was so broke. I wanted to give something to the church so bad. My offering was my WIC juice for communion. That's a part of my testimony. I was on Section 8. I was married young. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I'm a survivor of molestation, abusive relationships, all the things. And all those things that I went through, I learned how to advocate for those things and be a voice. I don't believe in that saying, like, I'm the voice for the voiceless. I am the voice of the folks that people don't want to hear or I need to amplify. So I found that in my journey, I started advocating for housing policies. I work for Bread for the World for food instability, advocating with faith leaders, organizing faith leaders. I've organized, I was a part of Head Start. My kids were in a Head Start program. That was another government program. Yeah, clap it up for Head Start. Somebody had to watch some babies because at home, mommy was not my ministry. And I was like, they gotta go somewhere. And while I worked and, when I was at Head Start, that was actually probably my first time of having ownership of advocacy because they was looking for a policy chair for a parent to be a part of what they call a policy chair. And one of the parents said, well, she always running her mouth saying something. Y'all should vote her in. Next thing I know, they had a nomination and vote, and I was sitting up there trying to read Robert Rules of Order. Didn't know what I was doing, but it was an older black lady said, baby, I got you. Just read what it say right there. Next thing I know, I'm traveling across the country advocating for parents and kids. And so my testimony, I know we got time to get into it, but a lot of it, and then also a testament of God's greatness of sending me real love. Shout out to my husband, Des and me. That's my Boaz. I'm trying to keep it all churchy here. That's my Boaz, of how he could restore my faith in love and what real love looks like, and someone to come love me and my children. And so my testimony goes from that, and then turning my pain into purpose, dealing with. Back in 2004 was the first time I was touched by the criminal justice system. And this is after, actually, I worked at a prison. I worked at a prison in 2001 at a maximum security prison, an all-male facility. And at that time, I was just excited to have a state job, because I was like, finally get off food stamps. And to be honest, the state of Florida was not paying me that much. I was still eligible for government assistance while I worked this state job. But working at the prison opened my eyes up because I knew nothing about the prison system. I had family in prison, but we didn't talk about it like that. Cuz just went up. Just cuz is on vacation. Cuz is somewhere. And where's cuz? No one talked about it. And actually, when I got my job at the state prison, I was in classification, and so I helped do the files, the transition, the transportation. And I realized that my cousin was locked up, the cousin that we didn't talk about too much, was locked up at the same prison I was working at. And I didn't let management know because I didn't want them to transfer him because I wanted to be able to keep an eye. And they called them close management inmates. Was their language. And basically, he was in the hole all the time. There was no humanity in the way he was being treated at all, in a box, mentally just losing it, and all the things. And that was my time of understanding, seeing the humanity in people. I remember, addressing the brothers in there by their last name or whatever. And I remember one of the guards corrected me, no, they're inmate such and such. She was checking me. Remember, I'm young, I was 19, I was just happy, And I remember saying, oh, God forbid, one of these could be my family members or God forbid my sons, not knowing that, one day it would be my new husband who was formerly incarcerated. So God was showing me that grace and humanity, and it was a lot. It was a lot for me to work in that prison. I ended up stopped working there because it started to impact me to the point that I would go home and stand in front of the door and the kids say, Mommy, what you waiting on? And I was waiting to hear the click, because I was so used to having to get clicked through the back doors. And I was so infatuated reading the stories, and they have this thing called post-sentence investigation. So you basically get to read the story of the person before they even became a victim or became even a part of the system. You got to read their story and what led to their incarceration. And I was always wondering, no one tried to help these people before they got to this point. So I was working at the prison, and then from there, 2004, about 3 years later, it was back-to-back hurricanes coming to Florida. We love hurricanes for some reason in Florida. I'm not talking about the football team. I'm talking about all the climate change things hitting us. The first hurricane, after the hurricane, it hit too bad, and it came with a FEMA check. So for somebody who's broke, I was like, look at God working through the storm. Because me and my kids were good, and we moved. But then the next hurricane came, and I was still living paycheck to paycheck. And I don't know if any of you all experienced this type of brokenness where either you have a car, but you have no gas. You got gas, but the insurance is not up to date. So during that time, we did a thing back in the day called write checks. Now, some of this new generation may not understand
They
that.
don't know what checks are or albums.
Yeah. Or ledgers.
Right?
We didn't have Apple Pay. You had to write it out. And one thing you was able to do was write the check a little bit over the amount if you needed cash back to put in your pocket. And I think people in the church will understand a thing called faith. And so I was operating on faith. My faith was that if I wrote this check on a Wednesday, they would not make it go through to the bank until at least the weekend, and my bank account could catch up and all the things. And so I wrote a check for $87.26. Now those groceries didn't come up to $87. I needed a few dollars for gas to get my kids to daycare. And that check bounced, and then it got returned. About 2 months later, I had 2 cops knock on my door. And I didn't know what the cops wanted. My kids are like, Mommy, the cops are here. I'm like, I don't know what they want. And they said, are you Sheena? We have a warrant for your arrest for a worthless check. And that day I was arrested in front of my 2 children, taken to jail. Thank God for that nosy neighbor who's always was looking out the window. This is the day I was glad she was looking. I was like, come over here and help me with these kids. And I was so green to what's happening. I remember it was like this good cop, bad cop situation going on. Like you could tell the cop probably was aggravated. They was even coming to pick me up for a check for $87.26. And I was like, can I walk to the car? Can y'all meet me around the corner? So my kids, they was like, girl, if you don't get in this car. And I was just crying. It was a mess. And I went to jail that day. And I was also nervous because my mom always said, if you ever get locked up, don't be calling me. That was like, don't call me. And I was like, I was wondering, did she really mean that? Because now I done got locked up, and I had a $500 bail for an $87.26 check. Because I had, because I was flourishing in money, so they gave me this high bail. So I got out, I paid the check back. I thought, the fines and fees and just my life will go on. Did not realize that my true sentence didn't really begin until after that. Because that is when I started facing issues of, housing opportunities. I could even have got kicked off my Section 8 because of the arrest, if they wanted to push it. Volunteering at my child's school, I couldn't go to SeaWorld, my youngest, some years later. I probably could have went, but the paperwork they wanted me to fill out was already stigmatizing and shameful that I was like, you know what, don't worry about it. Or even when I tried to enroll to go to University of Central Florida, I was met again with the questions. And I didn't let that stop me. I just went through the process. But I can imagine, it's not unique. There's 70 to 100 million people in America that have an arrest or conviction, 1 out of 3 people. So if you look around this room, just the numbers don't lie. The math is math. And 1 out of 3 have an arrest or a conviction. But I can imagine millions of people don't want to go through that process, So that's a part of my little bit of testimony. I didn't even pause or breathe, so I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, so I'm thankful for you and the resolve that you had to navigate all the things that you just shared with us. The question that I have for you is, how did you take ownership of your own story?
Yeah. So for a minute, I didn't, And to be honest, when I was doing the things like applying for college or to volunteer at my child's school, I was not thinking about those moments that I had got arrested. That was my first arrest, and I had another situation years later that resulted out of a domestic violence situation. But that was like, the system will remind me that I'm less than. It wasn't me owning my story. But how I started really taking ownership of my story, I would say that was an example of my husband. He modeled that. So my husband, Desmond Meade, gotta give my plug for my man, my boo, Desmond Meade, who is formerly incarcerated, But let me reframe. We're learning about this asset framing. We're part of a
asset framing from
We're
Being Me.
From Being Me. Let me say, my husband is a Time 100 most influential people in the world, Dr. Meade, Duke University honorary doctorate, who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He is in all the things and all the accolades, but before all that, his story was homelessness, incarceration, addiction. And when we got together, we're celebrating 12 years in December. And I remember when on the internet I saw his mugshot pull up. And I said, you don't want to get that scrubbed off the internet? I don't think that's a good look. He's like, no. I was like, why? He was like, Sheena, like, you know, it's a testimony for others of what they could achieve, overcome. But also, if I don't own the narrative for my story, somebody's gonna create the narrative. And from that was a seed that he planted, and that is when I started doing the work at Clean Slate. I really started having ownership around a clean slate, how it impacts folks, and yeah, that's how I started taking ownership of my own story.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about Clean Slate in a minute, but I wanna talk about what you said about family. Your cousin went on vacation, they in college, they gone for a minute.
Well, came back with no degree.
Came back with no degree. No photos of the vacation. So part of the conversations that we've had today is around how the narrative around it, and most of it begins at home. And so we have family members that don't help us understand or create the conditions for acceptance, or however you want to frame it. Like, why are we doing that?
You know, it wasn't until you start asking that question I started thinking about it. So the cousin that he's still incarcerated, his mother is a missionary and a minister in the church. And she has been. And she doesn't even ask us to write him letters, even to this day. And she knows that we're like in criminal justice, we care about these issues. And it has almost created a environment that, at least for me, I almost feel nervous to even ask her about her son because I don't know how she's gonna react. And I think it's the stigma and shame that she may feel like maybe she felt. You know, this is her only biological, son. And I think, mental health has some aspect of, leading to his incarceration. And some generational trauma of how we talk about people that get locked up that, they've done all the things. We don't talk about the systems that created the situation for people to get incarcerated. And I have other family members who are the same, like they're more active in visiting their loved ones, but it is this stigma and shame around, was it me who failed? And I probably could understand that because sometimes I reflect on how my mom might have felt as her 14-year-old child is barren and pregnant. And, my mom was a hard worker. She worked all the time, and it's not like she was just let me do whatever I wanted to do. I was finding my ways how to do things, and just lack of knowing the right and wrong things to do. But I could see how she could carry that shame and stigma of, that she felt or how people perceived her. And so the question is, how do we start having conversations to change that? Yeah.
How do we do that? And you grew up in the church.
Yes. I like the brother said earlier, shut-ins, revivals, 9 to 5, after church, another prayer session, at-home prayer sessions. I grew up, that was my life. Mm-hmm.
So did the church embrace you as a 14-year-old pregnant mom-to-be?
No. They didn't. It's funny because I can only imagine my family was like this. She pregnant again. But I'm also now the one that is carrying my family at the same time. So God was able to really turn that situation around to testimony. I know my family's very proud, but I believe that some saw what God could do in my life at that time, but some will also hold judgment. But no, I don't. There wasn't it was a very quiet situation. Not how can we help you, or ask my mother, how can we support you or pray for you? More so the questions, what's going on? No, I mean, even to the part, my mom I didn't have a baby shower till my fifth son. I gave that to myself because it was almost like it was condoning me having a child out of wedlock, and so I didn't have baby showers and stuff like that.
I only bring up the question because sometimes we make the pain that we experience, we externalize it to systems, but not the places that we should feel the safest. And so it seems to me that there was some element that you weren't safe, perhaps at home, in the church. There might have been some things in community. And so as we sit in this conversation, are there things that you could share that might have been different? And I say that knowing that God ordained all the steps, right? And that obviously there's a reason, a purpose, and a time for everything. But, you know, as we look at thinking about how we interrupt or support, particularly young people, are there any things that you could offer?
Well, I just want to take a step back of something that I felt was done right. So I'm from New Jersey, and my mom decided to come to Florida to get involved in some ministry work when I was pregnant. And I was able to enroll in a public high school that had a teen parent program. And this program, I think, actually contributes to my success of being able to finish high school. I graduated on top of the class. I had 2 babies on my hip at that time, but they made sure that we learned how to be parents, how to parent, because it doesn't come with a book. And, you know, as a teenager, it may feel like you're walking around with a baby doll, you know. But, you know, I had a teen parent program that was publicly funded by the school. We was required to take it as an extracurricular class. We was in the daycare. I tell people I really did ride the short bus because that's the only bus I could go on and put a car seat on. So little short bus used to come get me and drive me to the school with the kids. And that really played a big part in my success of graduating. And those teachers and those parents, those teachers in that classroom that spoke life into us, that believed in us, and, you know, saw us as young women and some fathers just trying to do good. And it played such a big part of my life. I recently reached back out to my high school saying, how can I support, advocate for more funding, financially support? And unfortunately, they said the program got cut years ago. And I wasn't the only mom in that school. It was a lot of teen parents in that school, and it just hurts my heart. I don't know what their future, may look like. So those are some things that I think were done right. There was somebody thinking about how do we, better educate the group of parents coming through.
Yeah. Talk to me about Clean Slate Initiative.
Yes. Clean Slate Initiative. So we are a national bipartisan organization that focuses on automating record clearance. So today in the country, I said there's 1 out of 3 people have an arrest or a conviction. Sometimes when we talk about mass incarceration, the carceral system, we talk about the folks that are living with the actual convictions, right? They have a felony conviction, misdemeanor, but there are also millions of people that have just an arrest on their record. That still serves as a barrier to them to getting jobs and opportunities because the amount of landlords that do background checks, employment agencies, and colleges, sometimes they just look at their check on the box and they don't even want to know the story. They don't care about the story. They just see, I've been arrested. And so right now, today, there are 30 million people that are eligible to get their record sealed, meaning that they have remained crime-free, that the law in their state says that after a certain amount of time, if you remain crime-free, under certain offenses, you could get your record cleared or sealed. But it's very cumbersome. It's a lot of red tape. In some states like Missouri, you may have to pay a high fee, and then the judge still has discretion if they think you're redeemable or not, even if you've done all the things. State like Louisiana's $500 per offense to get off your record. And so what we're doing is we're removing the burden from the person back to the government, saying, look, you said that this person is eligible. You said this person is deemed to get their record cleared. Just after that 5 to 7 years or whatever timeline, automatically clear the records. So over the last 4 years, we've been able to see success that 12 states have passed clean slate laws and adopted them. And 15 million people now have opportunity for a full or partial record clearance. So 15 million people today. And then in the coming years, and really excited that Minnesota is a clean slate state. So last year they signed clean slate into.
What are sort of your hopes for that work?
Yeah.
That it gets to all 50 states?
That all 50 states get on a pathway. We're definitely focused on the policy, but I always say policy alone is not enough. You got to change the narrative so that people are no longer defined by their records, by your past mistake or a moment. Sometimes I feel like sometimes it's not even I hate to say like mistakes, like it's a moment. It could be a moment. And we're really doing a lot in investing in narrative change, how we talk about the issue, how we talk about people with records, how do we change hearts and minds. You know, I was on CBS Morning Show, nothing like Conversation with Chanda though, but I was on CBS Morning Show last week, and as I was on the air and talking, the anchor said, before they panned the camera to me, the anchor said, "Me too." I said, "Me too what?" He was like, "I've been arrested as well." He talked about, you know, his arrest record with driving on suspended license and how his insurance premiums are up, but how this has impacted his life. And so, again, it affects so many people. And it's not an other issue. These are people in our churches, our congregations, our synagogues, our kids' football, the football parents, our neighbors, our loved ones. And we have to just redefine how we talk about people with records and how we treat people who have convictions.
I watched that news clip as I was preparing for you, and he looked like, what, a 30-something white guy?
Yeah.
And he just casually said, "Me too." And then he said something like father, like son. And it was super quick in the interview, and I'm like, what did he just say?
That's what I said. What'd you just say? I forgot I was on TV. I said, "What'd you just say?"
Yeah, you did. And it was sort of a moment, and I think that part of what I appreciated about the moment is that he obviously felt like he had the space to say it. Mm-hmm. I wondered if it was his first time saying it on the air because of the response of the other anchor or whoever the person was, but it certainly was in my head. And the stereotype of who I thought it would be. Like, why am I shocked?
Yeah.
Because obviously I have my own biases around who I think has been to jail and who hasn't. Mm-hmm. And it showed up in my body in that moment.
It showed up in mine.
Yeah, it did.
I was like, what? But I would tell y'all when the lights, you know, when they cut, one of the producers, and he says, "And that producer over there too, I didn't want to call you out." And then somebody else said something. I was like, well, we could have just did a whole segment on y'all team around here then, you know. But it does show up. I mean, you know, when we were leading the work, Amendment 4, that's the work that my husband led. Amendment 4 was a constitutional amendment to restore voting rights for people with felony convictions. Because in Florida, it was a part of our Constitution that if you had a felony, you could not vote for life. You were banned for life, no matter the felony. And let me just let y'all know, you could get a felony for catching like lobsters too big or too small and fishing wild. It's so many, they got so many felonies that it just doesn't make sense. But you were banned for life. And it was a narrative that, you know, oh, this is gonna help Black and brown people. Now, disproportionately, Black and brown people are impacted, but really the majority of the people that was impacted by this law were people that looked like the anchor. It was a young white man.
What do you think needs to shift in the narrative? So you're doing narrative work.
Yeah.
Can you make it plain for us and for folks listening? Because obviously we've got family members that are in avoidance. We have shame around it. We have systems that still today purposely exclude people. It's sort of like the story we heard earlier today, like we don't mind feeding, but we don't want to go in and figure out why it's happening. There are some boundaries around this, but for sure there's a narrative and there's a shaming that happens. What do we need to do to change the narrative?
That's why we're doing research so we can figure it out. I don't know all the answers.
You got any answers?
Yeah, I got a few. Yeah, let me see. So, you know, they're doing a lot of like focus groups and dyads. I'm learning all these different terminologies, how they do research, dyads, focus groups. And one thing that comes to me that's really interesting is that there's been a couple of situations with focus groups where they'll bring people in a room to talk about record clearance and see how they feel before they give them all the stats and the statistics. And there's been a few folks who will come in the room, start saying that they don't believe that people should get their records cleared automatically. But then yet that same person, as they continue to talk, it gets lifted up or exposed that their wife or husband has a record, or their child. And it's just really shocking that people will go, like, they will get so caught up in the narrative that they will be against the own interests of their families because it's like an other, and then it's like more, a little bit more, I don't know, I guess the shame, I don't know, I feel like it's been so buried, again, like going back to the stigma, the shame, that they almost, I don't know what it is. And so I think also, I mean, one, the media, you know, I was happy to be a part of a conversation some years ago. I went with my husband where there were producers and writers who were in the room really talking about like how they're impacting narrative and how we're talking about this issue in the media. I think media narrative, I think it starts at home. My grandma used to say charity starts at home. It's about how we talk about it at our kitchen tables, how we talk about the sister or brother that may have dealt with incarceration or that is coming home, how we welcome people back into our churches, our synagogues, our places of worship. Are we welcoming people? Do we have a stigma? I think a charity starts at home.
Yeah. Let's talk about the church prison ministry.
Okay.
Has it evolved? It feels like it looks the same as it did when I was a kid.
Yeah. You know, I appreciate the prison ministry as someone who worked inside of a prison, and I would see at that prison, again, I worked at a male prison, so that's my only experience to go to. I saw the excitement with folks who were trying to, happy that one, they had visitation, that people saw them, right? To came to care for them, pray for them, be there for them. But what I have heard from some people who've come or on their way home, actually, I'll give you an example that I kind of shared with you last night. So Pastor Darren Ferguson out of New Jersey, I was in a room with him. I was at a Healings community event, and he talked about when he was incarcerated, how the prison ministries, several of them come several times a week, and they'd come and, God bless you, brother, how you doing? Let's sing songs and worship, praise Jesus, and go on, and every week, nonstop. When it was finally time for him to get ready to come home, he went to each ministry. I'm going to be getting released in a couple of weeks. Well, God bless you. We'll keep you in prayer, brother. Amen. Amen. Oh, okay. The next person, oh, God is good. Amen. You know, we'll keep coming here doing God's work. And he said it was just one, he was getting kind of frustrated and scared and nervous about what reentry will look like for him and his family, him coming back home to wife and kids, and now want to continue his ministry work that he started inside prison. And it wasn't until it was this one smaller ministry, I remember his words was these white pastors, and they said, how can we help you? What can we do to make your coming home successful? What do you need? What does your wife need? And that's what really stuck with him, and that has contributed to his reentry ministry. But I think folks, they're so used to, I would just say in my experience, and I'm someone who still is in the church, we're used to just doing stuff in four walls. Whether it's the walls of the prison or just the walls of the church, but ministry goes outside the four walls. Kingdom work is really doing work that may not always feel as sexy and whatsoever. And it's like, how are we caring for folks when they come home? How we're making sure that they're getting placed at their house. There are families that are coming home that can't even be housed with their families because of a conviction if you're on public housing. And maybe your family had to resort to public housing because the breadwinner went away to prison. I've heard from mothers on my journey across the country that says, as soon as I came home, people were ready to give me my kids back, which I was grateful for, but yet I wasn't eligible to get SNAP benefits to pay for to feed my kids. Or I didn't even have the means to get myself established to really caretake for my kids. And so how are we providing the resources from mental wellness, mental health, to health care, to housing, and just resources for people who are back on their feet? And how can the church be an advocate for that? I believe that the church has a big voice, have a lot of influence on our different bodies of assemblies. most of our lawmakers, believe it or not, are people of faith, or they say they are. And I think we should hold them accountable to that with the word, with scripture, and how they should be an advocate just the way Jesus was.
Right on. Just a question, how can I help? I don't know, I got a little emotional about it. And then I thought about, I was at a conference and we were to ask people at our table, how can I help you? Mm-hmm. And it felt so simple. And I looked up and the woman across from me was crying. Mm-hmm. And she said, I don't think anyone has ever asked me that in a way that I felt it.
Oh, wow.
And that stuck with me because we are sitting in a place that has a lot of people doing good work. But sometimes the good work isn't reaching the people in the way that they need to be reached. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate this conversation, the Twin Cities United Way, for hosting it and beginning a conversation on, to me, it's how can we help?
How can we help?
How can we push the conversation forward? If you had advice for folks sitting in places like the United Way, what would you say to them?
Yeah, well, I think the issue of criminal justice intersects with so many different issues that people care about. And it's an easy way to intersect the issue, whether it's economic mobility, workforce development, public safety, making sure that when people come home, they could go back to work and have housing is a public safety issue, making sure that keeping our community safe. And so I would say really talk with folks that are closest to the pain, because they are closest to the solution. So that means if you're going into a meeting around how to show up for maybe this sector or this community or this issue, you cannot have a table with full people around the table are talking about criminal justice reform and don't have nobody that's there with some lived experience. Then y'all just talking to each other.
We got some amens in the church.
And so, and you're not asking folks to come as an expert. You're coming asking folks about their lived experience. Would this help? Do you think this will be helpful for the community that you represent, or based on your lived experience? And I think sometimes that's the big disconnection. Like, people do want to help, they do want to jump in, but it's sometimes ill-informed and misinformed by not having the people who need to be at the center of their work there.
Yeah. We have a question.
I wanted to piggyback off of the question of how can you help, and ask how can we, as community, people that are involved in community or average citizens, help with the Clean Slate Initiative around the country as well, from our own perspectives.
Oh, I love that you bringing the call of action before we get to the call of action. Come on, sis, help me out. So there's many ways that people can help with the Clean Slate Initiative. You can go to the website, cleanslateinitiative.org. But, I would say that everybody could play a role, and everybody's role may look different. You don't have to be a goober activist or advocate. I don't need you marching up and down the halls if that's not your ministry. We don't want you doing anything that's outside your ministry because you may mess it up. So don't do it. But, ways people could participate, even a simple thank you to your legislators who passed Clean Slate here, who championed it. A thank you could go a long way in letting somebody know that their constituents are watching and that they're going in the right direction. That's one. Making sure that implementation, meaning that the bill is actually working and having an impact that it needs to have, keeping the pressure on the lawmakers or the agency or the government, because we're not just trying to pass a law for when we want to actually see the impact that people could feel the clean slate. On the national level, there's a bill called the Clean Slate Act, because there's no mechanism on a federal level to get your record cleared unless you really good friends with the president and can get a pardon, or you got big money or something like that, in my opinion. So there's ways to share this conversation online with your loved ones, and also start the conversation at your kitchen table. I think the most important conversations are the ones that are in those closed doors, with folks understanding what is your nervousness about this issue? What are you excited about? What's the opportunity? Bringing people into proximity of, mom or dad, this was my friend's story. And we will want this for them because we love them, and what we want for others, So I think those are ways that people could get involved. And then in the states that are listening, that there is not a clean slate, starting to have the conversation, plant the seed. And then also the way the church could participate. Once the law passes, like the government feels that it's too much money to notify people. So there's millions of people that may be living their life like they don't have a clean slate because they don't know that there's a clean slate. And so it is important to have conversations like this that's going to be streamed on the radio, podcast, church bulletins, putting in your church bulletins, expungement clinics or ways to, as we help folks. One thing that I love in some of my work that I did with voter rights restoration with Desmond is that we had clergy and pastors do Second Chance Sunday. April Second Chance Month. How are you lifting up the stories of people during Second Chance Month, changing the narrative? But we had folks who focused on scripture or text that focused on second chances, and really dedicated a service to second chances.
I love it. Thank you, Uriah. When you were telling the story of the check, you said you had $500 bail.
Yes.
Can we talk about bail?
Yeah, we can talk about it. It's not my expertise, but I know I had it.
then you got a level of expertise.
And I ain't have it to give it to them either. So.
Yeah, so you didn't have it to give it to them. So what was the impact for you by not having money to pay the bail that was extended to you? So the judge said you can get out if you had $500. You didn't have $500. For the $89, $87.26.
I think I'm gonna get it tatted on me, y'all. $87.26.
Yeah.
So fortunately for me, when you get charged, they set a bond amount, and so that was set for me. Fortunately, it was my first offense, and I think the judge might have had grace and looked at what the charge was and that I had no prior offenses, and so I was able to get out on my own. Was it called ROR? Somebody help me. Oh, some of y'all been there before. Okay, there you go. So, okay, they working well. So that's how. Okay, they got other stories, so we can tell later. But that's how I was able to get out. But when I think about I believe that everything I went through was for a reason. Because when I sat in that jail, let me just say this. The second time I sat in jail. We'll tell that story on the next podcast. Okay.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Okay. But the second time, y'all, I thought, I done got out before, so, I think I'm a little, They was like, no, you can sit. I was like, no, I'm going home. They was like, no, you got to wait till you talk to the judge. And I did my 24 hours. And I connected with those women. By the time I came out, you would have thought I was a social worker. I was getting everybody's jobs. Like, I'm gonna get you a job, and I'm gonna call you. I got your mama number. Like, I was like doing all things. But when I reflect now, some of those women were sitting there because they ain't had no money to get out. They was literally just being held in cages because they didn't have anybody who could put the money up to get them out of jail. It wasn't that their offenses said they needed to be locked up. And that just hurt me, that I'm talking about, I'm going home, and everybody else didn't have that story. They didn't even have money to call their families, or their families could take the call. So in my 24 hours, I'm like, hold on, I got you, girl. Let me do a 3-way. It was that, for whatever purpose God put me in there for those 24 hours, for whatever reason, he was planting a seed that's now being manifested now. But I was able to see the stories that was being shared. And yeah, so Belle, people should not have to be sitting in jail like that. That's just unhumane, and it's putting a lot of money and stress on our government, on our taxpayers unnecessarily. And I remember when I was getting locked up that time, that we could do for the next podcast. I remember I had a good job at the time. I was working for the AFL-CIO. Now, they don't know. They know now where I went for that day. But I remember saying, because Obama was running for office and I was doing an independent, campaign. And then I remember saying, I can't lose my job. How am I going to explain this to folks? And that was a story of many people that they couldn't even call in. They were good workers. They had a job. They wasn't lazy folks. They had jobs. They were good workers. And, because of some policies, no call, no show. And then the stigma around, I got to explain to you, I got locked up, so now I'm opening up another can of worms. And so it's just a trickle effect.
Any questions?
Oh Lord, Justin about to come out with something deep.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna hand you the mic.
Stephanie. So let's see. Stephanie Lewis coming up to the mic.
So beautifully for the people who can't see.
Thank you. You know, I work in philanthropy, so I'm going to ask a philanthropy-related question. And we talked about the church and their participation in, in criminal justice reform, but specifically, how can philanthropy strategically support efforts to expand record clearance, not only through funding, but by fostering partnerships, influencing policy, and promoting long-term systemic changes to this issue? So what can we do beyond giving dollars?
Yes. Thank you for that question. So one thing we didn't get to is that I worked in philanthropy for a little stint, a little bit after I worked on Amendment 4. And I got to see all the good, the bad, the ugly, and where the bodies was held during that time. And I will say for the Clean Slate Initiative, there's more opportunities for philanthropy to step up, but I was blessed to receive a $75 million award through the Audacious Project about 2 years ago when I did my TED Talk. So I feel like I'm able to put the resources to the vision. But I think what philanthropy could do, not just for this issue, but for all of the criminal justice issues, we are seeing that the money is drying up when it comes to criminal justice right now. After George Floyd got murdered, and matter of fact, I got hired about a few weeks before he got murdered, and that was one of the first things I had to tackle inside of a mostly white funded organization, and like dealing with the racial tensions and all the things and how it was trickling into organizational stuff. But it was a big increase in funding across the country, and people was using it for criminal justice reform and all other issues. But now there's a dry up. It's no longer the shiny thing. It's getting politicized. Criminal justice is getting politicized very heavily, when morally is a common sense thing to like invest. And I think that philanthropy cannot take their foot off the gas. When we think about the overturn of reproductive rights in our country, it's something that people have been focused on for years. They have not stopped until they got what they call their win. And sometimes we, in philanthropy that supports this type of work, they want quick wins, they want fast wins, but we have to unravel years going back to, I heard the pastor talking about EJI, the Equal Justice Initiative, back to years of unraveling from like slavery to mass incarceration, and it's not gonna happen overnight. And if we want the change that we want to see, if we want to see the narrative change, that they gotta continue to support with their resources. Also making sure, I think one thing philanthropy can do is unite in strategies. I'm not saying that we got to force marriages and force coalitions, but there is like they are funding folks in silos, and people feel like it's competitiveness for money and dollars, and there's an abundance of money out there. I've seen rich people spend money on the most craziest things. Like, so folks, it is not a drought. It is, the money resides. It is out there, okay? And so, but if you unite strategies, and then we could really see that impact, that we need to see. U.S. came out with a report that actually shows that there's no longer like 1 in 3 black men are more likely to go to prison, that it has moved that now that it's more likely that 1 in 4 black men will go to college. And so we have some reduction in our incarceration among black men in some other areas. So we are having an impact, but we're not telling the story because we're always in a fight.
So philanthropy can help with telling the story?
They can help with telling the story. I think also like funding narrative change. So many times, and this is for organizers, I'm an organizer, we feel like there's so many areas that we could be leaning into, and as someone who comes from more grassroots organizing, we don't always stop to reflect and focus on narrative and research, evaluation and data to say that this is working.
And someone invested in you. You did your TED Talk, you got $75 million. You find a leader and you give them money and let them go, you're gonna see results.
Yeah.
Justin Terrell.
Thank you, Chanda. Thank you for this fantastic conversation. Sheena, first of all, I gotta say thank you. You and your husband have been a mentor and friend to me for years, and I appreciate it. Currently, the Clean Slate Initiative is negotiating with the University of Maryland on a pilot project for the JRC, my organization, to evaluate Minnesota's Clean Slate Initiative. And so I have two questions for you. One, can you just talk a little bit more about what makes a good clean slate bill?
Yes.
Right? Because we got to make sure that we don't fall for the okie doke, as a lot of times, policy leaves out, there's gaps in making it most effective. And number two, when you talk about, just to follow up on this question that Chanda asked you about philanthropy, the last movement arc that we built around criminal justice resulted in a robust response to the murder of George Floyd, which is really about the murder of a lot of people that we just couldn't take at that moment under a pandemic. I'm just a firm believer that we need a movement, right? And I know that Desmond is working on a democracy movement and others are working on different things. Can you speak to what that movement needs to be, who needs to lead it, and how do you see that movement building process? And how can I get the $175 million? Thank you so much for spending time in our city.
Thank you so much, Justin. Let me, if I can remember all the questions that was. So one, thank you to your leadership and the way you're leading here in Minnesota. And what makes a good clean slate bill? I feel like my team might have texted them and told them to get up to the mic and ask that question. So one, when we're not leaving anybody behind. And when I say that, there's some policies when everybody can't be a part of the policy. There's sometimes carve-outs or offenses that are not eligible right now, but we are creating a pathway so other people can in the future be eligible. But when I talk about not leaving people behind, I'm specifically talking about Black and brown people. So originally when we talked about clean slate policies and passing it, at that time it was a lot of more so arrests and just misdemeanors. And historically we know that Black and brown people get hit with felony convictions compared to their white counterparts. And so we have taken a deep dive looking at our policies, making sure that they're expansive. Now we're seeing clean slate passing laws where there are felony convictions that are being also cleared and passed. And so making sure that our bills have good impact, making sure that the waiting times are not long. You're not asking someone to wait 16 to 17 years to get their record cleared, when their offense probably was like 20 years ago. Come on now. And so making sure that the waiting times are shortened, making sure that who is eligible, expanding who's eligible. So we're working in some states, expanding who's eligible for the law. So that makes a good clean slate bill. Another thing I would say is making sure that it is bipartisan. This is not a one-sided, this is not a Democratic bill, this is not a Republican bill. This is a bill for the people. And I like to say, you don't politicize our pain, right? And we're not just giving it away to just any one party whatsoever, but we have to talk to people. It's a common sense policy. And so that's what makes a good bill, making sure that it, one, is impactful, one, that it is implementable, not just writing a policy that feels good and looks good for the lawmaker to talk on the floor, but is a law that could actually be implemented and have impact. I want to just shout out Michigan, who has done it well. On day one of the implementation, in April of last year, 1 million people records got cleared automatically. Automatically. And we've already been getting some research back on the impact of Clean Slate. So that answers the first one. And also, I just want to just name the model that we work from at Clean Slate. We work in a coalition model where we make sure that the bill on the ground, that partners are leading that effort, and it is a robust coalition with faith community, with policy folks, with advocates, grass tops, and directly impacted folks, because at the end of the day, those are people who's gonna defend the bill, right? So if you just pass a policy, who's gonna defend it when it comes to implementing? And then for your second question around philanthropy was?
Justin's second question was, who should be leading the work, and how do you build a coalition?
Yeah, I feel like in every movement, philanthropy wants to find the shiny one leader. That's too much pressure for people.
Thank you.
We don't. This is a different time than the times of King and Malcolm and all that. We know one person. And then some of them who are representing us, they just need to sit down. So right. I'm just saying that. I think this is a movement where we all can lead. We have different areas of expertise, of lived experience, and it's about us being unified around our messages and at least the impact that we want to see. We, the people, have to do a better job of putting our egos aside or being nervous about who's going to get the credit for the win or the credit or the drop in the in media, and come together and lead united. You know, I had a partner who was doing similar work, organization that was doing similar work, and I remember telling this young man, I said, look, we could go back and forth and close walls and fight, you know, back, like rumble a little back and forth. I said, but when we come out publicly, we need to come united so philanthropy don't pit us against each other, and we need to make sure our demands are seen because we're both directly impacted leaders, and that's what we stuck by. And so but I think, we do have a movement. I want to say, like, the Clean Slate Initiative work has created a movement where at first there were states working in silos during the pandemic. And I remember telling my team, we need to bring all of our advocates from different states together so we can have shared learnings, what we're struggling with, so people don't feel alone. And last year we had over 300 advocates from across the country come together in Philadelphia. Looking forward to 400 people next year. And this is now a movement that we're building, so.
Come on up, Sasha Cotton.
Thank you for being here. I'll try to keep my question brief. Thinking about movement building and sort of the outcomes nationally post-George Floyd, I work in the community violence intervention space, and there's been real tension sometimes between the traditional public safety space and the community violence intervention space, and I'm just wondering how you all have navigated sort of bumping up against traditional systems as you try to evolve and make those systems work better for the people.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you for your work that you're doing in the CVI, program. I will say one of the things that I feel like the criminal justice, the historical, reform space that I've been witnessing has been struggling with right now is the moving funding more to CVI, community violence intervention, which is needed, and it's almost like they're pitting you can't do both, and it's or. And where we need both to complement each other, and that goes back to my answer, keep holding philanthropy accountable and responsible, and coming together with those other groups and saying, look, we have to all do this work together if we want to see the impact that we want to see, right? We could do all we can with CVI and preventing the violence in our community, but if we don't have the jobs, the opportunities, people still living with records, the narrative's still the same, we're just funneling resource and not being good stewards of the resources. And it is up to us to, again, come together and hold philanthropy accountable and responsible. If you want to see us really do this work, we need to do it in a real meaningful way, and you're going to have to support all of us to make that impact you want to see.
Can you say what CVI is?
Community Violence Intervention.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for the work that you're doing. And being a member of Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church, Pastor Elijah said, don't just come on Sunday. If you got something else that you need to involve in, you need to get involved in it. I'll make this brief. I have an uncle who spent 35 of his 50 years on earth in prisons and in institutions. My grandmother and he were the only ones who kept me from being involved in the system. So when I look at it, I take it very seriously. And based on the conversations this morning, one of the descriptions I have of the criminal, I call it a criminal system that uses justice to justify how it works, okay? Because it isn't meant for justice any more than the education system is meant for educating. So what we're doing is we need to find a system, and I think the faith community is the place to do it, that operates outside of a system that is designed to keep us from enjoying the rights that we should have. And so I work with an education group. I won't go into it right now, but I will follow up with you, Chanda, and let you know that there is a system that really educates people. And if the faith community could get behind that in the prisons, K through 12, we can make a difference.
We can make a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. Adonaiah.
Your sister giving you, your little sister wrapping you up.
I know, I see her.
Okay.
I can see her.
Adonai Israel. I'm standing here as a justice impacted individual. 24-year man. what I sell or what I venture into my life today is hope. Everything that I do, everything that I think about, pretty much just it surrounds the idea of bringing hope back to people. Now, we've had conversations about how 1 in 3 male, how out of every 3, maybe 1 have been incarcerated. What I be concerned about oftentimes is like the kids, the children. The children to me seem to be impacted the most because now we see a lot of our young boys in particular, we see what's happening in the neighborhoods. You see it on the news and things every night. You hear it in the newspapers. Unfortunately, we all become witnesses of it. When we speak about philanthropy and where the money goes and who is helped, sometimes I don't really see a lot of funding when it comes to the mentorship that young boys and girls need in middle school and in high school. Because if we can reach them in middle school and high school, we won't see them as adults in prison if we give them the tools that they need there. So, I just speak to that. In what areas have the work that you've done addressed those things? If you have.
Well, first I want to say welcome home. Thank you for your leadership.
And thank you for yours.
Yeah, thank you for your leadership. 1 out of 2 children has a parent that has an arrest or conviction. 1 out of 2, that's a staggering statistic. That means, what does that mean for that 1 out of 2 children? What they see, what they experience, the absence, the struggles that their parent may be dealing with. Our work has not directly, at Clean Slate, been dealing with that. It is something that is at the foundation. We know that it will have trickle impact effects. And, we're doing research. But yes, I agree with you. We were just talking last night around the lack of programs that have been taken out of our communities. And I live in a state like Florida where recently, some months ago, I think there was a 6-year-old or 7-year-old was getting locked up in handcuffs, and the sheriff was making a saying, if your kids want to act up, this time we'll, showcase them getting handcuffed. It's getting worse. It's getting younger and younger. And what I would say is I saw a child that either needed a spanking or some resources around, maybe some emotional support for their peers or parenting. And there's not a lot of resources that are available for parents who are dealing with kids who may have those issues. And so there's a lack of, and this goes back to the interconnectedness of how all these issues just interconnect. I will shout out Jim Shelton from Blue Meridian, who does a great job of connecting a lot of these dots, but we're not bringing that forth to government and agencies and folks who could really put the federal funding and government funding behind it. And then I think we have a duty as a community. We can't all put on philanthropy. They can't save us. We got to save ourselves.
What's coming up for me right this second is I worked for a man, Tony Wagner, who was the president and CEO of Pillsbury United Communities. And he wrote a paper about how the social sector is over-professionalizing itself, that we value degrees and certain experiences over the experiences that people in community need. And so when Ad and I was talking, I was thinking about, him coming home and making a commitment to support other young people in community, and how many people do that. Unsupported, the coaches, the neighbors, the folks that are showing up in community with no formal title, no formal funding, no formal structure, but they are formal in the lives of these young people. And so I think that when we talk about mentorship, to me, it's bigger than mentorship. I think that there's opportunity to change the narrative on what it means to be committed in community and care for one another. And so thank you for being an example of what that is. And I think that we need to find opportunities for the stories of those that are standing in the gaps to come up in ways that so that there could be a broader understanding of what that infrastructure looks like.
Yeah, and I would say the folks who have access to the tables and to the powers that be that could direct funding and resources to those groups, to those entities that are that's helping our communities in ways, like you said, we should do that. On our Giving Tuesday for the past few years, I'm like, we're good. I mean, we still fundraising, but let me direct to funding to folks who may, don't have means to get the funding. But also, the issue comes in when we start really moving real funding. People want reports, metrics, and spreadsheets, and people like, this is not what I got into work. I came for impact, not to be doing a whole bunch of paperwork. So we got to do that in a different way as well. And so it could be where larger organizations could take the brunt of that and pass on those resources so those smaller organizations don't have to carry that load.
Yeah. So, I was told to wrap about 5 minutes ago. I could feel the energy, and I'm so delighted that you have already agreed to a part 2.
Yes.
That we have Twin Cities United Way and others that I'm sure will host it. And she's laughing, but I'm serious. And so that we can continue this conversation, I said it before, I'm saying it again. I am just thankful that you made the decision to turn the pain into purpose. As I was sitting here, if I had another question, I would ask you to name the people that kept you in purpose along the way, because I think sometimes when we're in the work, we don't think about all the people that stood there, like the women and the people that were in the school that said, despite what the narrative is, you are worthy, that there is a future for you. And so thank you to all the people that saw the future in you before you saw it in yourself. And I hope that can be inspiration to people that are navigating every day, overlooking people and issues, understanding that the power of being in relationship with people can be life-changing. Yeah. So thank you for being life-changing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I know I shouldn't answer your question because your sister looking at both of us. But I will say there's power in planting a seed, and I will close with this. There were many people that might have planted a seed in my life with words, with their actions. And I know they came back around and be like, she's still doing what she's doing, huh? But they would come back and speak life and speak word and say what they see in my future, what God could do for me. And I compare that to, we're in an area that I learned has a lot of farming. And so sometimes when you plant a seed, you don't see it starting to bud, but there's something happening. It's getting rooted. It's getting rooted at the bottom. And so, but you got to keep planting those seeds of life, inspiration, and that is the water and the fertilizing. And today, they are seeing the manifestation of their seeds that are planted. So I would say for folks not to give up on those folks or those family members that are dealing with incarceration or coming home trying to struggle. Continue to plant those seeds, continue to encourage, and you will see the manifestation of your seeds and your words, because it came through with me.
Thank you for being in conversation with Chanda. Let's give Sheena Meade a round of applause. Thank you, sister.